weighed and measured at a recent medical check in Indianapolis. He clocked in at 6 feet and 166 pounds. At Alabama, he was listed at 6'1" and 175. And so as I bring everybody in, and Kimberly Martin is with us today as well. I'm sorry, Cindy, tell me that again. They are there. We will get a shot up in a moment. But Kimberly Martin, I will ask you this. You have sat down with Devonta Smith of late. How much of a concern do you think it is for NFL teams that he only weighs 166 pounds?
Greeny, I don't think it should be, but I'm sure there's some teams that have their preferences. Look, I've covered a lot of bad teams and bad players and a lot of guys who looked the part, yet they didn't put in the effort and they didn't love the game. So, and guess what? Those guys aren't in the league anymore. You can't say anything bad about Devonta Smith besides the fact that he might not be 6'4", 220-something pounds. The kid's a baller.
Of that, there is no question. But if I have Lewis and Booger with us here as well, I guess I would ask that. I mean, Lewis, you played in the defensive secondary. Are there not ways that teams can take advantage of that? I'm just envisioning guys bumping him on the line of scrimmage and creating problems and all that sort of thing. Again, this is not to suggest he isn't going to be a terrific player, but there has to be some disadvantage to the fact that he only weighs 166 pounds.
Yeah, look, obviously, you want bigger, faster, stronger players anytime you can get your hands on them. I mean, that's a given. But look, I will say this. Look, the game of the late 80s, early 90s, in the early 2000s, let's just say the 90s and 2000s, is not the game that we see today. And when people start talking about wide receivers who are slightly built like Devonta Smith, and they start going, well, he's not going to be able to get off the jam in the NFL because at the NFL level, we jam differently than in college, then you haven't been watching a whole lot of NFL tape. There's only a few teams that jam at the line of scrimmage and actually try to disrupt wide receivers and beat them up at the line. The rest of the teams, it's more or less like a swinging gate type of philosophy. They just get up there at the line of scrimmage and try to look pretty, and then as soon as the ball is snapped, they're letting wide receivers get free access. And there's a reason why wide receivers are ripping secondaries to shreds and quarterbacks are throwing for 4,000 yards like it's just easy, like they can do it with their eyes closed. And then furthermore, the league is different between the numbers than it was 15, 20 years ago. Guys aren't taking big shots the same way that they were back then. Look, back in our day, there were, quite honestly, there were some headhunters. There were some people who right now would have been licking their chops at Devonta Smith if he were playing in the league now. It's not like that anymore. And I know a lot of teams, teach guys to go low because they're trying to legislate headshots out of the game. Look, whether you're 220 pounds, you're 166 pounds, you take some of these shots on your knees, you're going to be done regardless. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no concern as far as his weight is concerned and as far as his build. He's a fantastic player. He's going to have a fantastic career.
Here's the thing, though, Boog. I mean, I'm looking at a guy who just had one of the greatest and most productive seasons in college football history, 23 touchdowns, won the Heisman, broke every SEC receiving record that there is, most of them held by Jamar Chase from the year before. And yet he's not going to go ahead of Chase. He may not go ahead of his teammate Jalen Waddle. And this arguably is the reason why, yes?
Well, Greeny, it just depends on how some of these guys have Smith and Chase and Waddle rated. I think when you look at Chase, yeah, he's a little bit of a bigger player, but there's a question mark on him. He hasn't played in a year, but a year ago, he was the best receiver in college football. Jalen Waddle brings just a little bit more explosiveness. That first step, his ability to go from 0 to 100 in 2 steps is absolutely amazing. So I think we all agree. All 3 of these receivers are going to go in the top 3. Here's the thing I'll say, Greeny. Size is not a skill. Okay, it's just a feature. And if you go back and you watch this young man play in the SEC, better yet, just go back and watch him in practice against Patrick Surtain, a 6'2" cornerback. I haven't heard anything about Devonta Smith not being able to get off the line in practice. So I think it's way overblown looking at him, 6 foot 166. As you get a little bit older, as we all can attest, you're going to gain a few more pounds. You'll get a little bit heavier. I think he will be fine when it comes to his weight, Greeny.
Kimberly, again, you sat down with him. He spoke about this when he won the Heisman, about being doubted because of his size for so long. What kinds of things did he say?
Greeny, listen, the first thing he said to me was, turn on the tape. Tell these teams, turn on the tape. What do you see? You see a guy who's
3rd overall pick in this draft. Over the course of the last week, it went to Justin Fields, and then it went to Trey Lance, and now it has gone back to Mac Jones. Sometimes it seems they just follow Shefty's Twitter feed and they make up their minds from there. So let's do an exercise here. Mel, again, you are synonymous with the draft. As we consider the prospect of one of these quarterbacks falling, and again, I'll put that in air quotes because None of them are falling all that far. Give me the absolute latest you could see the fifth of them coming off the board. At what number would be the latest you could anticipate that possibly happening?
A couple things. I think Mac Jones goes 3 to the 49ers, which means that it's Trey Lance. Does he go to Atlanta, or does Kyle Pitts go to Atlanta? Then Justin Fields and Trey Lance get into that Carolina at 8. Some people think Carolina could. I don't think so. Denver at 9 certainly could. Then you get into that situation. If those quarterbacks, one of those two drops into the teens, guys, then there's a couple teams lurking. They're sitting there and within striking distance would be Chicago, Washington at 19, Chicago at 20. And New England's sitting there at 15. They could jump ahead of New England if New England's not aggressive and think we can stand pat and have a quarterback fall in their lap. I don't think so. So I would say somewhere ahead of New England, if one of those quarterbacks gets into that 10 range, I could see a Washington, Chicago jumping up and getting one.
It's such a fascinating scenario, and I'll just remind everyone watching that the key to this really might be what Atlanta does at 4, because if they take a quarterback or someone moves up to take a quarterback at 4, now there's only one instead of 2 of them falling in Mel's scenario. So same question to you, Boog. What do you think realistically is the latest in this draft we will be calling one of those 5 guys' name?
Well, Greeny, I think all 5 are going in the top 10. And I think when you're looking for a team, I think New England will probably be the latest point. I think at some point, New England is going to look and say, okay, if there's a quarterback sitting there at 7 or 8 or somewhere, maybe we move up, make that phone call. Maybe they call Carolina and say, okay, you have Sam Darnold, you have your quarterback of the future. Let us come up and get ours. I think there's a premium on these quarterbacks. I think right now, based on how many you have in this class, based on a lack of quarterbacks as far as what we know next year, I think if you're New England and you're looking at your long-term success, you sign Cam Newton to a 1-year deal. I don't think at least that he's the answer in New England. So if you're Josh McDaniels and you're Bill Belichick, you got to figure out a way that if one of those guys start to fall 7 or 8, you go up and you get the quarterback. I think New England, I don't know what pick because I think they'll have to trade up, but I think New England is as far as the 5th quarterback falls in this scenario.
And with a trade-up. So, again, New England sits 15, but you're not saying you think he'll fall there. Our producers are going to yell at me, but, Lewis, I'm kind of changing the question on the fly because this just jumps into my head. How quickly could it all go? I'm sitting here thinking to myself, if the 4th pick in this draft, whether it's Atlanta or someone else who makes it, if we do have the unprecedented scenario of 1, 2, 3, and 4, forget about how far they could fall. How quickly could they all go? How quickly could we see all 5 of these guys go off the board?
Well, I think then, if it becomes a situation where now it's becoming scarce, and now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and like Trey Lance is not there anymore, or Justin Fields isn't there anymore, and you really just have one guy left, then I think you can wind up have a situation where teams like New England, teams like Washington, teams like Chicago, I don't know if they're willing to give up that kind of draft capital in order to move up, but I think then all of a sudden you have those teams, in a flurry, rather in a tizzy, trying to get up into the top 10 and see if they can get whoever the last quarterback is that is left. And I think then you have a lot of action on the phones. We may not see it, but I think you're going to have a lot of action. Number 4, the 4th pick, obviously everyone knows, is where it all starts. If Atlanta doesn't take a quarterback, then I think right away teams are going to get on the phone. Teams are going to say, what is the point that we have to get to? I think New England gets on the horn. I think for sure, if Mac Jones goes for 3 at 3 like everyone expects, I think, personally, the guy who people will start moving up for and trying to get, a team like New England in particular, my opinion, is going to be Trey Lance. I think that's the guy that people are going to target. I think that's the guy that a team like New England will target. And it is going to get real interesting because then the 8th spot at Carolina, it does become a point where they're probably going to try and get to because no one knows what Denver's going to do at 9. It's just going to be fun. As soon as Atlanta picks, we'll know what's happening behind the scenes, no doubt about it.
Assuming Atlanta does pick. Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, I think Detroit at 7, guys. If one of those quarterbacks is there at 7, right ahead of Carolina at 8, and I don't think Carolina will take a quarterback, but like I say, some do, then that's 7 spot. If I'm the Lions and I'm getting a nice offer to get out of there and all the needs the Detroit Lions have in this rebuild, I'm getting out of 7 and letting somebody jump in there to get that quarterback.
That is the point I was trying to get to. We could